Preto acolhe nesta manhã todos os participantes do 2º Congresso Internacional de Saúde Mental, Escola Franca e Franco Basaglia. Nós temos aqui essa grande satisfação de poder recebê-los, um espaço que a Câmara tem oferecido desde 2009 de discussão das políticas de saúde mental, especificamente no município de Ribeirão Preto. A Faculdade de Filosofia, Ciências e Letras da USP tem sido uma grande parceira para que, pelo menos, a gente não retroceda, o município não retroceda nas políticas voltadas à saúde mental. E, com certeza, as atividades que serão desenvolvidas no dia de hoje, na manhã, à tarde e amanhã também na Faculdade de Direito, possibilitarão a todos os usuários, a todos os profissionais, a todos os gestores, a todos que se interessam pelas questões de saúde mental, avançar naquilo que a gente entende que é o tratamento que todo usuário do serviço tem, a garantia legal, mas infelizmente há uma grande distância entre a teoria, aquilo que nós temos enquanto marcos legais, mas aquilo que se oferece na prática, principalmente a dificuldade dos gestores entenderem o investimento necessário, os serviços necessários, voltados principalmente para a inserção do usuário dentro da sua comunidade, do seu território. Com certeza vamos sair muito enriquecidos dessas discussões e motivados, mais desafiados na nossa prática cotidiana. Gostaria de convidar a professora, a doutora Clarissa, o Rádio Webster, para que possa, a grande idealizadora desse evento, para que possa fazer as boas-vindas a todos e dar início a esse congresso. Muito obrigada.
Então, bom dia a todos. Nós estamos muito felizes de poder ter essa oportunidade, de ter esse workshop. Gostaria muito de agradecer à Câmara Municipal, a vereadora Glaucia Berenice, pela oportunidade de estar aqui, pela parceria sempre constante nas questões de saúde mental do município. E desejar a todos um bom workshop. A gente está vindo já de Marília, já passamos pela experiência com o Richard lá e posso dizer que é uma experiência muito rica, muito transformadora. Então, nós estamos muito felizes com essa oportunidade de trazer um pouco desse trabalho do Open Dialogue aqui para Ribeirão Preto, de estar disseminando essas ideias, da gente estar podendo ver como a gente pode colocá-las em prática no nosso dia a dia enquanto profissionais. Agora, no período da manhã, nós estamos, então, com o workshop do Open Dialogue, com o Dr. Richard Armitage, e no período da tarde, com o workshop de ferramentas conversacionais, com o professor Rolf Sandet. Então, desejo a todo mundo um bom dia, tenho certeza que vai ser um dia muito rico e agradeço imensamente ao Dr. Richard por estar aqui com a gente hoje e por estar compartilhando um pouco mais da experiência dele com a gente. O Richard é um psicólogo, mora na Dinamarca e já vem trabalhando há muitos anos no treinamento de profissionais de saúde mental nessa estratégia do Open Dialogue, que ele vai se apresentar melhor e vai contar um pouco direitinho qual é essa estratégia, mas uma estratégia de trabalhar com o atendimento de crises psicóticas rápido e na comunidade, né, que vem demonstrando que diminui internações, diminui o uso de medicamentos. Então, é uma estratégia, acho que, bem importante para a gente estar conhecendo e trabalhando. Então, bom dia a todos nós. Obrigada.
Bom dia. Good morning. Thank you for being here. I have to say I'm completely overwhelmed, slightly worried by all this equipment and cameras, and it's a very, very strange sort of situation to be talking about dialogue in. But fortunately, there are two very nice translators sitting in there, and they said to me before, if you get stuck and run out of ideas, then we'll be happy to help you. So I guess I'm going to be okay anyway. Thank you, Sandra. So, my name is Richard. I'm English, or I was once, when I was young. The last 30 years I've been living in Denmark. As Clarissa said, I'm a psychologist. I've been working in psychiatric services for many years. I suppose originally I was trained as a systemic family therapist, and along the way met up with these ideas of open dialogue, which, as I'm going to talk about them today, refer to a very particular way of working in psychiatric services, which has been developed in Finland, in Lapland, West Lapland, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's actually one very, very small area in Finland which has been working to develop these ideas of working for since the early 80s. We in Denmark and many other parts of the world have seen and heard of this work that's being done there and been inspired by it. It's not a kind of method that you can just transplant to another context and then we're going to be doing open dialogue here. It's very much more an ethical, driven, values-based, relational understanding of what is it to be a human, what is it to be a human in crisis, and what do we need to try to do to be able to meet humans in crisis? How can we humanize the psychiatric services we have? That, for us, where I have been working, has involved really enormous challenges to try and see how can these ideas which have been developed up in Finland, how would they come to look if we tried to put them into our context? What would we need to do? What can we do? How could we adapt them culturally to actually be meaningful in our own context? And as the ideas travel around the world, there are projects in England, in Germany, Poland, Italy, Australia. I have friends that go to Japan to do trainings in Japan. I've heard of people in China working with this. There's a large, a lot of people working with it in the States. So gradually people around the world are looking to this, and as we go through the ideas, then it will also become clear that one of the reasons for the spread of these ideas is that they fit so very well with some of the wishes and demands and needs of user movements around the world. So, I'm going to be sort of running a little bit back and forward here because we have this, I just don't like standing back there and I feel stupid, to be honest. So, as much as I can, I'll stand here, but I have to go back there to do some. I'll do a little bit of work with slides, but I'll try and leave the slides behind and just write on the board here instead. Yesterday we did the workshop in Marilia. We had a little bit longer time there, and it felt much too short. So I know that it's going to feel much too short today as well. What I want to say, I'm not going to get through it all. But for me, it's really much more important than that I say everything I need to say, that we have time along the way for you to become active, to find your own thoughts, to also, we're too many to all talk together, but so that I'll be asking you to talk with each other, to just digest the ideas, take them a little bit in, actively begin to think, what would this mean if in our context, what does it mean? How do we see it happening already, or what is accessible and what seems really inaccessible? What is familiar? What is unfamiliar? Could I just ask sort of a little bit about who's here? Are there people who are familiar with systemic, narrative, collaborative therapies here? Certainly some, yes. Oh, actually quite a few. a clump of you here. Yeah. Okay, and others, is it people who are working in services or using services or know people in services? And working in services? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it was yesterday and earlier as well, a very mixed group. So for some of you, then what I say is going to sound very familiar, and for some of you, it might be new. But I think probably I'll try and, at any rate, start really trying to go to the basic ideas of what this is about. It's really not in any way rocket science. It's not advanced theory. It's not even anything new. It's all kinds of very fundamental ideas about being in relation and living in this life, which are used and familiar in many other ways of thinking and working. So what I'll ask you to think about along the way is really the cohesion of how it all has, in this particular context in Finland, come together to create something special. That they've, looking at their practice, very critically studying their practice, they've pointed to certain elements which they have found to be quite essential. So today, looking at these things, then you can maybe put the question to yourselves: how do these things look in our services? Or they might be familiar. Maybe this bit looks very much what we're doing already, but how does it look in our services with these different elements of practice, which I'm going to be talking about? Okay. So I think the first thing I'll do is give you a little bit more detailed sort of background for how did this arise. And here I'm an Englishman living in Denmark, talking to Brazilians in Brazil about something which started happening in a very small part of Finland. I mean, it seems a bit absurd, but I think that together we can make it become quite meaningful. As a start to that, I would ask you actually just to maybe turn to your neighbor or a couple of people around you and just use 5 or 10 minutes to find your own thoughts about what does this idea of dialogue mean for you? I think it's something which spans very many levels of life. It's certainly more than the idea of just exchanging communications or talking together. But perhaps I could ask you to just use 5 minutes help each other, talk together, to think, why are we here? What are we talking about dialogue for? Isn't that something everyone does? They talk together. I mean, so what do you expect that might become, might grow out of something, a system which focuses so clearly on the dialogical part of being. So just talk together for 10 minutes, and then I'll move into the history and the background of this system we call open dialogue, and then later on we'll move into the sort of essential, fundamental aspects of that work. Okay? So, I'm over here now. So could I gather you again? You are really a long way away. I'm not going to stay here very long, but I just want to do a little bit of work with the slides. To tell you, as I say, this is the sort of more informative part. This is just about the history, because as I said, we are talking about something which originated in Finland, in West Lapland in the early 80s. In Tornio and Koropedos Hospital, where there was a team that were very much engaged in trying to work with both ideas of systemic therapy and integrating with psychodynamic therapy at that stage, as many people were around the world. They were incidentally also a team under pressure politically to develop a more community-based service in order to be able to close down the larger hospital. The first, I suppose, the first level of definition of when we say open dialogue as it comes from Finland is as an integrated and community-based system of treatment that engages families and social networks from the very beginning of their seeking help. And this really contains some of the essential elements, that it's a whole system. As they have developed over the years, then it's not just a way that one team practices, or that one patient might meet with a particular group of therapists, but the whole region and all the agencies in the region have adopted the same fundamental principles of really working together in an integrated community-based system. It's also essential to see the focus on this network perspective, that there is always, in some sense, a network of people around, also people in the most serious crises. Where I work now with people who have been in other psychiatric systems for some of them really many years, then a lot of people would say, but these people, they no longer have a network. That might sound strange in Brazil. In Northern Europe, it is quite common for people to break their links with everyone around them. So these are people that would appear to be extremely isolated, have lost their links to near family, and you don't see them in relation to many other people. But even there are always around them people that are of value and meaning in their lives. It might just be the person who sells them cigarettes, but that contact once a day is important. So finding the people who are there, or who are of meaning in this person's life, and involving them as much as possible from the very beginning is fundamental to this process. So the organizational level is vital, and in many ways determines how can the work in the particular situation be done. Of course it does. But the idea of open dialogue also involves a particular way of meeting with people, of being with people, and of working in dialogue with people. So it also refers to a dialogical practice, or you might say a distinct form of therapeutic conversation, which has a very particular framework around it, which we'll call the treatment meeting, and I'll come back to that in a bit. And a third and important level of what we call open dialogue here is the level of continuum development. So when I say that I'm not talking about a manual-based system which can just be transferred, it also refers to an idea of continuous development, education, research. I think that the team in Kurapudus must be among the best educated, trained workers in mental health services in the world. Every single member of the team has been through at least a 3-year family therapy education, followed by a 2-year network education, and with constant further development, which I think is really quite exceptional in services, and supports the level of work that can be done in these meetings. Research has also been important from the very beginning. It's research which has generated some outcome results which are really astounding, and which have, of course, given rise to the great interest there is around the world for this work, and has at the same time given rise to a certain amount of criticism and skepsis. People have criticized the lack of randomized trials, for example. There's the evidence base is seen as compromised by the fact that it's almost entirely naturalistic research based on outcomes. But the outcomes are really astounding. Let me see if I can just find some of that. Oops, I'm gone. Oh dear. Sorry, my system went to pieces. So just, you can find these papers, of course, if you search under the name of Jaakko Saikola. But just as to give you an idea of what we're talking about, that after some years of working with this integrated system, the research took everyone that had passed through the system. It was around about 3,000 patients that had been through the system to study the outcomes. And what they found was, in the first 5-year follow-up, I don't know if you managed to see it before it disappeared. There it was. That after 5 years of this group, 35% had needed and used at some stage neuroleptic medicine. So this means that of a group which was primarily first episode psychosis as the cause of coming into the service, more than 60% had never used neuroleptic medicine. They'd managed to get through the crisis without the use of neuroleptic medicine. 35% had at some stage used medicine, and less than that were still actually, after 5 years, using neuroleptic medicine. At the same time, they found that of this group of people with first episode psychosis, after 5 years, 80% were without functional symptoms and had returned to some kind of working life or study. And in terms of comparison to many services, that this is almost the inverse proportion of people actually in 5 years recovering to that extent. So it is quite exceptional figures. Later on in the next long follow-up study, they found also that a surprising development, that the number of newly diagnosed people that were given the diagnosis of schizophrenia had fallen from being almost the highest in Finland to a very low level, actually just 2 per 100,000 annually. And that finding was confirmed by outside evaluators checking the diagnosis and these and so on. But they were then looking at these figures and saying, how does that happen? What might be going on here if the rate of newly given schizophrenia diagnosis has fallen so radically in the course of these years? And the hypothesis they work with has really been that if every person that comes into the services from the very beginning involves the important people around them, then each patient perhaps brings in 10 or maybe 15 people, and every patient over a period of many, many years, then the sort of penetration into the community, the number of people in the community that have had close connections with the psychiatric services is really very, very large. And the hypothesis is that they have succeeded in generating so great a degree of trust in the community that people very early on, when they find themselves or others around them, the near ones, developing worrying, unusual, ununderstandable symptoms of behavior, then the trust in the system is so great that they take up contact very, very early. So using this idea of duration of untreated psychosis, they have reached a figure of that period being under 3 weeks, which is really very, very low indeed. And this way of working with people also has to be said, assumes a model of particularly of psychosis as being a state of crisis, and being able to meet the person in crisis and allow that person to regain a foothold on life very early in his own particular network. Again, the hypothesis is really contributing to preventing chronification. So what starts as a first episode psychosis is just not developing into a more chronic course and leading to diagnosis of schizophrenia. So this is the explanation which or the hypothesis at any rate which they find that they're working with. And again, that is a very impressive thought, and one which has led to criticism. People say this cannot be so, but it's what they have experienced there. So let me try and get back to where I was. As I say, they started with a reasonably well-established systemic practice, but there was also a context in treatment systems generally in Finland, very much borne by Professor Yrjö Alanen, developing what he called for need-adapted treatment. So where many other places the tendency and the direction was towards a more precise diagnosis leading to a well-defined treatment plan. They were working very much on a basis of meeting with the individual person, and had already there started meeting with the network to really explore what is happening for you at this time and what would be helpful for you precisely now. And this meeting between the team from Tornio and Alanan's need-adapted approach really was a kind of a watershed for them. This is where they changed and began to develop the practice which we now call for open dialogue, which I'll describe in more detail as we go along. So as I said, the systematic outcome research which they've been doing, at one point they took these 3,000 records and looked at the outcomes and said, so how have these good outcomes emerged? What seems to have been the factors associated with the good outcomes, and where is it that the poorer outcomes have arisen? And in that analysis of these outcomes, they reached a number of factors or principles, you might call them, which seem to be, in their context, the principles for optimal treatment. And those are the principles which I will go further with presenting you for now. So it's not a theory-driven approach. It's not an idea which has started with theory and turned into a practice. They've looked at where has the practice given the best results and what seems to have been happening there. And on that basis, arrived at these 7 principles, which I'm going to go through with you now. And to do that, I'm going to come back up there because I really can't stand being back here. I can't see anyone. So perhaps you could just use 5 minutes talking together to just digest a little bit what I've been talking, and then I'll come up here and start presenting the 7 principles, as we call them. So just talk a little bit, and I'll be there. It's nice to be back. I can see you again. I don't really have very good eyes, so when I'm back there, I think there's people out there, maybe. Okay, just before I go on, I really don't want to open a discussion now, so dialogical. I'm not that dialogical. But any questions, is there someone who really needs to ask something now? Then we can just take that. Okay.
Richard, por favor, você poderia falar um pouquinho mais de qual que é o entendimento que o Open Dialogue tem sobre a crise, que é a crise, a psicose?
Crisis, and particularly the idea of psychotic crisis, is the understanding really is that psychosis is a breakdown or a point at which the ways of sharing and communicating and describing something which is experienced in one's life are insufficient, just don't work. Which leads to a kind of total isolation, of being unable to validate, relate to, share, be with other people, or be in your own life because of something happening in yourself. So this is a kind of crisis understanding of the actual psychotic experience, which one description. Which for many people is a worthwhile description, for other people doesn't even begin to reach their experience of maybe an important or valuable or breakthrough experience in their life where another kind of reality becomes apparent for them. But if that other reality is impossible to integrate in the way that you're living your life, then that leads to a breakdown, or can lead to a breakdown. So that would be, in terms of the actual psychotic crisis, then that would be sort of very, very quickly described. But then if that connection breaks down for one people, it's also breaking down for a lot of other people. So that situation typically would be very confusing, desperately chaotic maybe, sometimes dangerous, or certainly feel dangerous. All kinds of very, very hard emotional storm weather happening in that for people around the situation. And that over time can build up to some social and relational situations which are at some stage can't continue. They break down, and that also is part of the crisis. So the crisis relates both to what might be an inner experience for the one person, but also for the consequences and of what happens around that in the whole social network. Is that okay? Okay. Anyone else? Just one? Yeah. And of course, we're going to be having more time for discussion later. But just if there's any particular, could you run up to there? You have to have the microphone turned on.
Eu gostaria de saber se existe uma abordagem sua de segmento na prática do diálogo aberto, na sua atuação.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. Is approach of...
Certo. Enquanto psicólogo, né, na sua prática de atuação, eu gostaria de saber se existe uma abordagem de segmento teórica. Por exemplo, psicanálise sistêmica. Existe uma base? Ou não necessariamente?
I think the important word for me was the integrated system. So this, as I will describe, how do we actually receive the person in crisis or who come to the service? That I'm going to describe now. And that's what we call the treatment meeting. In the course of the treatment meeting, which then continues as over time as necessary, then the patient, the family, the professionals might agree that another kind of therapeutic work would be helpful or necessary, and they would arrange that. They might also, it might be a social help that was necessary, and they would work towards that. So whatever the actual requirement turns out to be, they would work towards it. But keeping it in this framework of the treatment meeting. So, for example, if someone decided that they would like to work with an individual therapist, whatever that might be, narrative or cognitive, I mean, what might be helpful, then they would, after that, continue with the integrated treatment meeting, but also invite the therapist to join that meeting. So, because that would then be a new and important person in the network. So, there's not a single therapeutic direction in this idea, but searching for what would be useful for these people in these circumstances right now. What I think has been a surprising experience, both in Tornium but also in my practice, has been how therapeutic this treatment meeting in itself can become. This process of meeting together with the people that are necessary and just talking together turns out to be a very, very healing and empowering experience for many people. So in some of these processes, then that would be enough. But as I say, if something else is indicated or agreed on, then that would become part of it. Okay? But okay, I would like to be able to get on and say a little bit more about the actual meeting. I think that might answer some of the questions in advance, but of course we'll come back to it afterwards. Would that be okay? Yeah, thank you. So, it's also sometimes a bit strange. It sounds almost religious to talk about 7 principles of open dialogue. It's please remember, this is just a way of talking about that a very careful and close and critical analysis of a practice has identified these as important factors. So I'll try and describe them, and then we'll see how those fit into other kinds of practices. What is it? Clarissa, we have until 12, isn't it? Yeah. So, and there'll be time for a little break at some time. But I'll just start on these. The first principle is called immediate help. Immediate help. So, particularly in this crisis situation, that the person who asks for help, takes contact, receives the immediate response that, yes, you have come to the right place. Who is involved? When can we meet? In the system that they've developed in Kurapados, this has been really operationalized as a practice where they offer the first meeting within 24 hours, always. So someone receives the call. It might be from the person at the center of the situation. It might be from someone in the network. It might be from a doctor or professional. And the person taking the call then initiates the first meeting, which must be held within 24 hours, inquiring who would be important to have with us, who's involved, who's important, and this idea of, from the very, very outset, involving the important members of the network. I don't know what your practice looks like. What I'm familiar with in most psychiatric services in Denmark is that very often it would be the family that bring the patient in, and then they're sort of left outside somewhere when, and the doctor would talk to the patient alone. And sometimes, and particularly if the family looks like reasonable people, then they'll be also invited to participate in something. But very often they'll be just left outside and actually not brought into the process until the treatment has been defined. What are we going to do? And then the family will be informed. This would be a very common traditional approach in many services in Denmark. So this idea of, before you even start seeing who is involved here, could we get them together now, is fundamental. And of course, that's not unusual in systemic thinking, or many other ways of working. What the team in Tornio found, and this resonates very much with my experience as well, is that at the very beginning, although they invited the family in from the beginning, they would be there for a while and then they would sort of stop coming. And the question there was, why would that be? Why, when a loved one is in such dire trouble, why would they stop coming? And I think the great contribution that they brought, this team, is that they actually turned it around and looked at themselves and said, what are we doing wrong? Or what is it that we are doing at all, since these people, even though they start coming, that they don't carry on coming? And the idea that they had was that they were not allowing them sufficient involvement. It was a kind of pseudo-involvement. They were there, but they were there just to be informed or to give information, without actually being involved in the essential process of determining which way are we going with this treatment. So for a long time, they invited the family in, but they saw them as people that they somehow were also treating. They saw it as a kind of, already here, as a sort of a kind of family therapy where they were, as professionals, their task was to intervene and inform the family how they should continue. And first, at the point when they began to work with the idea that it's not our task to intervene in this family, it's our task to understand from them what is needed. That they became a resource both in describing and understanding and choosing and deciding the next steps. At that point, when they began to work like that, then the families began to attend and stay and work through the whole treatment course. So this idea of immediate help was not just to be accessible, but the quality of the meeting from the very first is to really be looking for the resource in the family and working with them according to their needs. So this is a very sort of natural development of the need-adapted approach, which I was talking about before. It's also, I think, familiar. Was someone here was working with collaborative therapy? Yes. So I guess that would sound very familiar to you. These are. Okay. So I'm already well into the second principle, which is this idea of really maintaining a social network perspective. And I think I've said most of what needs to be said there. This is really both in terms of seeing the person at the center of concern as being involved at every level with others who are important to both develop the understanding and to develop the treatment. But beyond that, it's also represents quite a radical move for the professional in terms of what is the role and the task of the professional in moving away from the idea of intervention and closer into the idea of involvement. So for certainly in terms of many other ways of working, this becomes one of the more challenging requirements of developing this kind of work. I don't know what the culture of your treatment systems is here. For us in Denmark, there's a very strong hierarchical system. But not only that, but there is also quite a lot of law material which determines what needs to be done. The professional is the person who very much has a responsibility to do something to the other person, to take them from being in a bad place and put them somewhere else. So actually remaining in that position of responsibility, but finding a way of engaging and involving without being the intervener, without being the one that decides what's going to happen, is a dilemma which I think will continue always. I don't know how many of you have heard or met the people who are here from Trieste, who work very, very much with compulsive treatment, with not forcing any kind of treatment, but actually working with negotiation. And that, of course, could be an element of this. But still, even in negotiation, I think there is always an intention to move somewhere. You might let go of a little bit and say, okay, we don't need to go that far, but we need to get here. But there's always an intention in negotiation. I think this idea of dialogue is slightly more radical than that, but it's difficult. And then, of course, the social network, as I was saying earlier, is more than family. The social network is what it is. It's who's there. A man who came to our service a while ago who had a very, very serious suicide attempt, and when he actually managed to find any words at all, really described a huge degree of isolation in his life. But it turned out that he did actually, he lived way out in the country, and the nearest neighbor was about 3 miles away. But he did, once in a while, on a Saturday evening, then those two would get really, really drunk together. And this man that lived about 3 miles away. And when they did that, then they actually talked together. And this person turned out to be an important part of this life, and was very willing to participate, to come and be a part of this meeting, to talk about what has happened, what has brought you to this point. And that conversation was important in terms of finding out how could he go on from there. So this was not the kind of high status, obvious network you might want to look for, but it was very important. So it might be, and very often is, family and near family, might be neighbors, friends, colleagues, might be your employer, might be other professionals. But the point is from the beginning to really check who would be important to involve here, and who would you like to invite, who could be helpful at this point. As I say, often in quite a surprising way. Now, getting all that to fit together can be quite a logistical challenge. How do you manage to arrange a meeting within 24 hours with a great diversity of people, some professional with very, very booked diaries, families who need to be at work, employers who have all got. How do you do that? So the next idea is the idea of flexibility and mobility. So this involves both in terms of time, in terms of physical location, that when investigating with the person who's taken contact, who needs to be at the meeting, also investigating when would it be possible, where would be best for you, where would feel safe. This idea of safety, of course, as I'm sure you will have with you in your practices, is absolutely fundamental. What would be the most safe place to meet? In traditional services in Denmark, we have psychiatric emergency wards, which are open 24 hours. So in that sense, you might say there is immediate help available, but people coming in might come into a very chaotic, hectic environment with lots of other people there also in crisis, have to wait hours for the doctor, not be sent from one place to another. So there is, on paper, there is of course an immediate accessibility of the service, but but what the person who meets there is not an experience of, this is where I can get help. It's just an introduction to hell. It's just chaos again. This is, of course, very categorically said. There are good services and people have good experiences as well. But the risk of of coming finally, for many people, finally looking for the help that is needed, and having an experience of really not being met because everything is geared to the needs of something else than me, I think is very, very common and very frightening and causes a lot of people to leave again. So being able to say where would be safest to meet, if it's at home, ensuring that the team makes the home visit as the first meeting. If it's, well, we could meet at the priest's place, because the priest needs to be with this, then you could go there. If it's at another professional or wherever feels best and might make it possible to meet. I suppose some people really don't want the team to come home at first. They need to develop enough trust first before they'll invite the team home. So they might want to come into the team's office, but so that's what you do. It's not an absolute rule that you, of course, have to go out, but the place that feels safest. I think this also relates a little bit to your question about where does the treatment go. This idea of flexibility is that is also adaptiveness. So we all meet, but where we're going to go with it, we don't know. And you find out, and the mobility is also this willingness to move from your own initial idea, understanding, plan, to be able to see that what is needed here is something else than I thought, and let go of the first one, because that's what emerges in the meeting. Which of course relates very much to how are these meetings actually conducted, and I'll come back to that a bit later. Next, responsibility. This has to do with the person taking the first call, saying, yes, you've come to the right place. It sounds too banal to be true, but that is just unbelievably important. And so many people have experienced finally actually taking the decision to look for help and ringing to someone who says, oh, that doesn't sound like our sort of thing. Maybe you should call them, or specifically, oh, that sounds like you need the addiction service, not the psychiatric service. So I'll give you a number or whatever. People who have finally taken the decision are not met. So this became also very important, that the person who was on that day sitting at the telephone takes the call, has the responsibility to just go on with it and find out what is this situation, who is involved, and arrange a team for the first meeting. If in the course of that, then it becomes perhaps an idea that, okay, this sounds like there is a psychotic episode, but it sounds like that psychotic episode arises in the context of maybe a period where the person has been using more alcohol or more drugs than usual, then not saying you need the addiction service instead, but saying it sounds like that might be important. Would it be okay to invite someone from that service to the meeting? So keeping the responsibility, having the responsibility for building up the framework of that first treatment meeting, and ensuring that the people who will be at the meeting will be the people who would be able to continue the treatment process from there. Just to add a fifth here, psychological continuity. Which, of course, relates very much to the first. So that the team that is needed is assembled, and that team will then continue with the patient for as long as needed. And if the patient maybe at some stage doesn't need the service anymore and stops, but comes back later, they would try to reassemble at least the core members of the same team again. But the people who are involved from the start will continue through the whole process. This involves trying also to, what they do in Garapadas is that there be someone from an inpatient ward and someone from an outpatient service, at least, would be in the team from the beginning. So if at some stage the patient does need to have some time on a ward, then the team remains involved in that, both in and out. I think there are all kinds of aspects of that idea of psychological continuity, which you will of course be very aware of in all kinds of other therapeutic endeavors. But again, I think it functions on many different levels. It's not just a question of I'm here today and I'll be there next week and I'll be there next week, but that if your need is that I'm there at precisely that point, that I would really try to be there and not in 3 weeks. That the continuity is also momentary, that at every moment, and that of course is not something which we can promise anyone. Well, I'm there always, forever. That can't be. But if that is the foundation of the relation, is that I will move as far as is possible within my context to be there in relation to your needs, then that builds up a trust which makes it possible to go on. Yeah. So in the first, if after the first meeting, the family decides, or is the network is able to see that we would be able to continue without the patient being going to hospital, and this is a community-based approach, so it is really fundamental that as much as possible is done to make it possible for the patient to continue in their life, in their own context, for as much as possible. But if the family says, well, we can do it, but what makes it possible is that we know that you're going to come again, the team is going to come again tomorrow, then the team comes again tomorrow. And often, if it's a severe crisis, then maybe there would be really necessary to meet every day for the first week or 2 weeks. And then maybe it's possible to move to every other day or every third day and every week and so forth. But as often as possible, as often, I'm sorry, as often as necessary to make it safe enough, just safe enough. Good. So there's 2 more to go, but I'm going to talk you to sleep if I just carry on. So could you just use a few minutes to talk to each other, and maybe there'll be some questions, just to digest it a little bit, and then we'll take the last 2 after that. So just have a few words. What does this sound like? Is it very familiar? Is it what does it look like where you are? Okay. Okay. Could let me make you a promise. In quarter of an hour, there's coffee outside. So a short break. So I just want to get the last 2 points here, but before we do, as I say, please not discussion now, but any burning questions. Yes?
Na nossa conversa aqui, né, apareceram algumas dúvidas, algumas vontades, né, de conhecer melhor o serviço lá. E uma delas é, a partir do primeiro contato, né, alguém que ligou para o serviço, né, a pessoa que atendeu, né, que perguntas vai fazendo para colher, né, as informações relevantes para o 2 e para o 3, de como montar essa rede, quem são as pessoas importantes para chamar, né, e aonde que vai acontecer esse encontro. Então, como que é essa conversa inicial? Porque a gente entendeu que a partir dessa conversa inicial, né, aquele profissional ele já vai ter algumas informações, né, para articular o primeiro encontro. Então, que informações que são essas? Obrigada.
What is happening? I think would be a good place to start. What has been what has brought you to this point that you now need to call? So what's happening today is probably not the same as last week. So something's happening recently. Has anything anything else happened other than being big events? Is this familiar for you? Is it unknown for you? Does it have a history which you've worked with before, or is it something completely? So all this to really locate a present moment. What is the elements of the crisis here and now? So it's not a kind of diagnostic history we're looking for, but what is happening here and now, and what is the difficulty here and now, which would lead to the questions of and who is involved in those situations. If it's the person themselves who's asking, then it's very easy to ask, and who would you like to come, and then explore that. Are there other people who might be important? Do you have help other places that we should invite? If it's a relative, then of course you would need to know. So, what does your son think about that you're ringing now, and so forth. So everything to locate a timeline to this very present moment. What is actually happening and what is actually experienced as difficult in this moment. So that I suppose would be the guideline for a conversation, which would become very different in very many situations. I think that there are also some experiences of that conversation in itself leading to the person saying, "Oh, well, maybe we don't need to come today," you know. I'm not quite sure how much more I can describe that in terms of the where and the when. Then really to emphasize that we are prepared to come to what is your need and where would be the most safe place for you to meet. If the mother says, "Well, he said I could ring, but I'm not sure about him being at the meeting because he doesn't usually like to," that sort of thing. Then you could say, "Well, if we were at your house, perhaps we could meet in the sitting room and he could choose to come and go as much as he likes." So that would be also a way of exploring what would help to make it safe enough for the people who are necessary to be involved. see. I'm thinking of a young woman who came in with very severe sort of depressive and in a psychotic degree after birth of her child, and with really terrifying thoughts of damaging her child, and she actually just came to the accident warden and said, just lock me away so that I'm sure that this doesn't happen. And then we were called in to come and meet with her there to say, well, what can we do here? And with quite a long conversation, then she reached an idea that if her mother-in-law, who lived quite a long way away, but if she could be brought in and could be at home, then she would dare to go home. And then we could meet with her the next day. So there were very few people involved in that, but arriving at this feeling of that would be enough, that would make it safe enough, that was important. So those conversations can be very different, I think. Yeah. Is that okay as an answer? Yeah. So I'm thinking of your coffee. Can I do just the last two? So I wrote them up already. The first one, it's called Tolerating Uncertainty, and this, as apropos the example I just gave, this feeling of unsafety, of really desperate fear for something terrible might happen, that really needs to land somewhere, to be able to leave the room at all. And very often that degree of chaotic, anxious fear that can be around a crisis situation really demands that something be done, do something, whether it's doctor, take away everything that's bad, or lock him away, or whatever, just do something, make sure that my daughter is still alive tomorrow because she's going to kill herself. Those things cannot just be, well, we can meet on Tuesday and talk about it. It just doesn't work. So all of this becomes completely meaningless if it's not enough for the person to feel safe enough. And that means really ensuring that every person involved can bear the uncertainty that is in that situation until the next step. So we're not thinking about until next week, but just until tomorrow. What would be enough to get through to tomorrow? Tolerating uncertainty, I think that if you think of that, what do services usually do when the uncertainty is great enough? Well, that's where it begins to move towards all kind of compulsory treatments. This idea of we have to remove the symptom because that symptom is dangerous, or we even call it something not just dangerous, but it's really, we can't allow the person to suffer that much. We say they're suffering too much. We have to take the symptom away, which is very much the reason for giving medicine very early, giving antipsychotic medicine from a very early point, or other forms for compulsory treatment, fixation, locking away, shutting people up. All those are the really, of course, the really serious incidents. But even before you get to those very intrusive treatments, then there are all kinds of decisions which are very tempting to take very quickly. Oh, it seems like it's a really bad idea for you to continue being at work when it's like this. You stop now, or whatever. So decisions in crisis, the higher the degree of anxiety in the crisis, the quicker the pressure and the greater the pressure to make rapid decisions. And often, very often also, to move the seat of the decision away from the person concerned, so someone else makes that decision. So this idea of tolerating uncertainty is saying that if we do everything that we can to ensure that people feel okay just until we meet the next day, then we can postpone those too rapid decisions until we have a better picture of what is actually happening and what would be helpful just now. And that then, of course, along with all the others, leads to this last very, very difficult, airy word of dialogism. What is actually that about? And I'm not going to keep you from your coffee to talk much about that, but we'll come back to it when we talk about how does the treatment meeting actually look, what happens, what is the form of communication that we're working with in the treatment meeting. This dialogism, this idea that every voice is important, is meaningful, is valid, is not necessarily right. We don't need to find the true answer and agree. It's not consensus we're looking for, but involving and making space for and validating every voice in the room, and living in that exchange and also presence of many, many different and often struggling, competing, conflicting voices at the same time, being able to be in that. I'll get back to that when we talk about the meeting. But now, take a break, have a cup of coffee, it should be just out there. And please, don't stay away for half an hour. I'm going to start again in 15 minutes.